All right, so we need to talk about the digestive system. The digestive system, one of the things we're going to focus on here as we go through is a general lack of understanding of how digestion works. There's a lot of misinformation out there about how digestion works and the process. And these sort of misunderstandings often cause issues, especially when it comes to diet and nutrition. It's created an entire market of fad diets and diet supplements and things like this. A multi-billion-dollar industry based on a lack of understanding of how physiology works. So as we talk about the digestive system this semester, we're going to go through and we'll talk about several different fad diets, if you will, and the physiology behind them, or a lack of physiology behind them. The first of these that we'll talk about, and we can do it right off the bat because it really has nothing to do with the digestive system, is the HCG diet. Now, you would expect that any sort of diet would necessarily need to involve digestion. This one does not. The HCG diet is administering something called human chorionic gonadotropin. HCG is the hormone that's detected from the pregnancy test. It's what gives you that second line on the pregnancy test. We'll talk about its function during pregnancy. We'll get to reproduction a little later. As prescribed originally, and by practitioners of this, you would have HCG injection with a 500 calorie a day diet. 500 calories a day. So your first question is, does that work? Well, 500 calories a day, you will lose weight because you're starving. That's a quarter of recommended daily allowance for calories. It's like 2 Cokes. There's nothing to that. So yeah, that has nothing to do with HCG and everything to do with a lack of eating. So right now, I know this is several years out from when this was at its high point, but when people were doing this, the questions I had were, I'm not getting an injection. I'm doing the HCG diet, but I'm not getting an injection. The reason for that is that actual HCG is a prescription drug. You can't get it over the counter. It's also a protein. It's a hormone that's a protein. And as we talked about earlier in the semester, that makes it susceptible to digestion itself. You would rip it apart into amino acids. So it would have to be injected. What this has done is this has pushed HCG into the homeopathic market. So homeopathic, so if, just in case you're unaware, we have a word here. Homeo is same. And pathic, like disease or pathology, right? So same disease. The idea of homeopathy is based on a premise called like treats like. Think fight fire with fire. The thing is that if your house is on fire and you throw more fire on it, it's just more fire. That's not helpful. So in the 1800s, guy Samuel Hahnemann came up with this idea, and legitimately, okay, so there's this hypothesis, let's test it. So he tested. And while this is not the actual experiment, this is sort of a generalized example here. So imagine that you have a patient that has insomnia, and you give them crystal meth. Well, now they have super insomnia, and they're addicted to meth. So he does this, and again, this is not the actual experiment that was done. So he does this, no results, right? It makes things worse. And okay, that in itself is a result, and you can say this doesn't work. Instead, what Heinemann thought was, it's going to work it's just too much, so he backed it off some, diluted it. It's still nothing. Again, dilute it. It's still nothing. Dilute it until there's nothing left. Nothing, but it didn't make things worse. So that counted as working for him. His premise was that this serial dilution, which means you put a drop of, in this case, let's say HCG in water, and then you take a drop of, let's say we take a drop of HCG and put it in a gallon of water, shake it up, take a drop out of that, put it in another gallon of water, shake it up, take a drop out of that, put it in another gallon of water, and so on. How many times do you do this? Let's say infinity. Because in any homeopathic substance, you should not be able to detect a single molecule of the original substance. If you can, it will not be homeopathic. By their own definition. By their own definition, there is nothing in that. If there's something in it, not homeopathic. The major marketer of homeopathic things in the United States, at least, is Highlands. And Highlands teething tablets are one of the things they sell. Teething tablets for your children. And they're a homeopathic preparation of nightshade or atropine, which is, of course, a neurotoxin. And that consistency of having nothing in them was tested. It's been several years, but they had to recall it all and then go back and reformulate, because apparently you could find nightshade in some of those pills, which again, with a homeopathic thing, you should not be able to find it. They're sugar pills. Oxylococcininium, that's a hard word to say. The flu thing that you can buy over the counter, produced in France. Again, by their own definitions, there's nothing in it. In fact, in an interview several years ago, the CEO was asked if there was any dangerous side effects, and she said, of course there's no side effects, there's nothing in it. But that's the definition of homeopathy. Often homeopathy gets confused with naturopathy, and naturopathy is, of course, using like natural things to treat disease. But homeopathy is using these seriously diluted substances to treat disease. The idea being that if you put, say, HCG in water and shake it up and then do this dilution thing, that water has the energetic imprint of HCG. This is not going to do anything. Homeopathic treatments are still sold over the counter everywhere, but they're totally safe for use. You can't overdose on anything that's homeopathic. You can take every single homeopathic medication on the shelf in CVS today and you'd be fine. Alright, so there's that. So homeopathic HCG is just a little bottle of water for $40. But who thought of the original thing? So the original thing with like real HCG was developed by a physician, Albert Simmons. His idea was that injections of HCG would let dieters subsist on this starvation diet. The idea being that HCG mobilizes fat and suppresses appetite, redistributes fat to reduce hunger in people that don't have food. There's absolutely no evidence for that. 500 calories a day is going to do damage. You're going to lose organs. Proteins are going to be damaged, ripped away from the organs. Actual HCG being injected into you will have adverse effects because it does act like a reproductive hormone. It can throw off your reproductive cycle. It can change your ability to reproduce. In 2009, the American Society of Bariatric Physicians issued a statement saying, don't do this. Since 1975, the FDA has required a label to be on actual HCG that says, don't use this for weight loss. Why do they have it at all? Well, they may have it in a reproductive specialist trying to prevent chronic miscarriage. HCG is associated with viable pregnancy. In 2011, an FDA spokesperson said that the HCG drops you could buy over the counter were unapproved drugs and illegal. Why? Because they don't meet the College of Homeopathy standards. They don't even meet the homeopathic people's standards. It was just too lucrative, and people got in immediately, and then you had companies that were really selling bottles of water. All right. Your question for me here is, why don't they do anything about it? Why? Because they're not poisoning you. The FDA's job is to keep you from getting hurt, not to keep you from getting ripped off. Somebody else's department. So yeah, they really haven't cracked down on this. The reason that it's even still around is that it was repopularized in 2007 in the weight loss crew they don't want you to know about. I don't know who they are, but they want you to be fat. Called it McDonald's. Carol Baskin. The book itself violated a 2004 order saying that there wasn't a weight loss cure they didn't want you to know about. And it also violated that mandate that said that you had to put a label on it that says it doesn't work. They fined this guy $34 million for the book. In the meantime, other companies jumped on this, and at its high point, they were charging $70 an ounce for what was basically water. Professional athletes do use actual HCG injected into them. Why? Because it keeps your testicles from shrinking in between bouts of anabolic steroids. So people that tested positive for HCG, Manny Ramirez, Brian Cushing, I can imagine this test, they call him back and they're like, "Hey Manny, congratulations." And he's like, "What?" They're like, "You're pregnant." "What?" "Oh, never mind, you're just cheating." Yeah, because that's what you test for HCG, is just pregnancy tests. As a man, you should not have HCG unless you're cheating at baseball or football. Another thing here that I like is how MLB banned him for 50 games in 2009, and the NFL banned him for like 4 games. Baseball's like, don't do drugs. Football's like, don't get caught doing drugs. Alright, so now, like I said, that has nothing at all to do with digestion. And it's stupid, because any sort of diet or nutrition thing that you would be recommended should have something to do with how your digestive tract works. The digestive system itself is really 2 groups of organs. The digestive tract itself and the accessory organs that aid in that action. So the digestive tract is one long tube all the way through. When you think about the digestive tract, think about the roll in the center of a roll of toilet paper. Toilet paper, you remember toilet paper, we used to have it. Those rolls of things, paper, cardboard tube in the middle. The digestive tract is like the cardboard tube. It's going through you. Food is just passing through you until it's absorbed. So, I drop a marble through the middle of that roll of toilet paper. It's not in the toilet paper, it's just passing through the toilet paper. So we've got one long tube here. There are 6 essential activities here for digestion. Bringing stuff in, moving stuff through, and then breaking it down, both mechanically and chemically. We have to absorb the small molecules that we break down, and then get rid of what we don't want. The digestive tract is continuous with the outside environment, so it's subject to all the stress of the outside. Friction and bacteria. And it loses moisture to the air. So it has to accommodate these transitions without losing that. And in the middle, it's got to be really thin so that you can actually absorb stuff. There's lots of insults here, so cells are going to be turning over all the time. They're constantly being reproduced. And it has to protect you from digesting yourself. there's a lot of surface area here. For instance, your small intestine, the surface area of your small intestine would probably cover 2 tennis courts. That's associated with absorption. Large intestine, mouth covered in bacteria. You got to protect yourself from that as well. In your large intestine, there are better than 100 trillion bacteria that are yours. Normal flora. You're basically a bacterial god. They worship you. You're their world. They will aggressively defend their world against foreign bacteria. But in the meantime, you're going to lose because you have this bacterial gang war going on in your guts. This is what happens when you drink the water in Mexico. Those 2 groups of normal flora fight each other, and you pay the price. So let's look here. Our digestive tract. Standard tube. 4 major layers. The mucosa, submucosa, the muscularis externa, and the serosa. The innermost layer is the mucosa, and it itself has its own 3 layers. You have the epithelial layer, epithelial cells. Depending on location, we may have simple squamous epithelium, simple columnar epithelium, or stratified squamous epithelium. The lamina propria, a little layer past this, loose connective tissue, and then the muscularis mucosa, a very thin layer of smooth muscle right here. Like I said, epithelial may be simple columnar or stratified squamous. Find stratified squamous where we need protection, think the mouth. Simple columnar where we need digestion or absorption. So the oral cavity, the throat, the mouth, the anus. This is stratified epithelium. The intestines, the stomach, digestion and absorption, simple epithelium. Deep to the epithelial layer is the lamina propria. This is loose connective tissue with some blood vessels and some sensory nerves sensing the contents of the tube. Deep to that is the muscularis mucosa, a very thin layer of smooth muscle that just moves the inner mucosal layer. The submucosa is a band of tissue just past that. It is dense, irregular connective tissue. It is very dense, irregular connective tissue. It is so dense that you can stretch it out and spin it and turn it into like the strings on tennis rackets or guitars, violins. If you've ever watched the old Tom and Jerry cartoon and the cat freaks out when they run the violin factory, it's because they used to make violin strings out of cat gut. There's a nerve plexus here, and those nerves contain sensory neurons that sense changes in the intestine, and motor neurons that innervate that muscularis mucosa. The muscularis externa are 2, sometimes 3 layers of smooth muscle, depending on the organ, that move things through the intestines. They're involved in peristalsis, this wave-like movement through the digestive tract. The nerve plexus here is called the myenteric nerve plexus, with sensory neurons and motor neurons to coordinate the movement of stuff through the intestines. There are actually more neurons here than there are in a spinal cord. The only organ that's got more neurons in your body is the brain, and most of those neurotransmitters are also found in the intestines. Alright, so here's peristalsis, wave-like contractions pushing stuff through the tract. If you've ever seen a snake eat anything, peristalsis. We'll find the muscularis isn't standard throughout, like it's thicker in the large intestine. It's got 3 layers in the stomach. There are different types of this, but the big picture here is that the muscularis externa is coordinating peristalsis and pushing stuff through the digestive canal. The outer lining of the digestive tract is serosa, loose connective tissue, and some simple squamous epithelium. So let's start with digestion. We'll start at the mouth. In the mouth we have teeth, mechanical digestion. They break big particles into smaller particles. It's mixed with saliva, and in saliva we've got a couple of enzymes, salivary amylase and lingual lipase. So we get some digestion of starch and some digestion of lipid, very little here in the mouth. Mostly what we're doing is breaking stuff down and then liquefying that so that we can swallow it. Saliva itself is mostly water with some electrolytes. Immunoglobulin A, part of your immune system. But again, mostly water. Your mouth is teeming with bacteria, however. Every time you swallow, those bacteria are getting washed down. When you don't produce any saliva, the bacteria can sort of blossom or replicate out of control. And this is what we see in people that have like meth mouth. So you do methamphetamine, it mimics the sympathetic nervous system. You don't produce any saliva. If you don't produce any saliva, then the bacteria get to run rampant in your mouth because you're not constantly killing them off by swallowing them. Food's going to come in the mouth, down through the esophagus. We do share this pathway here at the pharynx, but we're going to then enter the esophagus, the flat muscle tube right behind the trachea. It goes in the diaphragm, the esophageal hiatus, and then joins the stomach. The esophagus, stratified squamous epithelium in the beginning. As it gets further down, closer to the stomach, it will transition to simple columnar epithelium. Here's the esophagus. The tube from the mouth to the stomach. So now let's talk about the stomach. Here's the stomach. We have up here the cardia. Sorry, the cardia is right there. This dome part up here is the fundus. This is the body. This is the pylorus. This is the greater curvature, lesser curvature. Muscle right there is the pyloric sphincter. And the wrinkles inside are called rugae. From the lesser omentum up to the liver, from the lesser curvature up to the liver, we have the lesser omentum. And from the greater curvature draping down over the intestines, we have the greater omentum. Here's the greater omentum, this yellow, fatty apron thing. And then here's a drawing of the lesser omentum between the stomach and the liver. Nerves here, sympathetic and parasympathetic, sort of standard. And we've looked at the blood supply before. The muscularis externa, we've got 3 layers of smooth muscle. So the stomach can contract in 3 different directions. It's churning and mixing and breaking stuff down. The mucosa is specialized because some of these cells will be glandular cells that are releasing a product that controls stomach function. Here are these gastric pits, and we can see these cells. Parietal cells, chief cells. These green ones are called enteroendocrine cells. There are also mucus cells here that secrete a thin mucus that helps protect the wall of the stomach from stomach acid itself. So blue one's a parietal cell. Parietal cells make hydrochloric acid. This gives the stomach a pH of, like 1.5 to 2.5. So parietal cells, hydrochloric acid. Parietal cells also make intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor is, of course, that thing that's needed so you can absorb B12. Now, that hydrochloric acid is going to denature protein, which means it takes that protein, the 3-dimensional shape of that protein, and it breaks it apart. So now we have like less three-dimensional shape. Chief cells secrete pepsinogen. Now, earlier in the semester we said that anything that's got that suffix on it, that's an inactive protein, an inactive enzyme in this case. When pepsinogen comes and meets that hydrochloric acid from the parietal cells, it becomes pepsin. Pepsin is a protease, which means it breaks down proteins. So now we're going to start breaking those proteins down into smaller bits. There are enteroendocrine cells here that secrete chemical messages, hormones, paracrines, that are going to be involved in digestive function. The stomach secretes a mucus barrier that prevents it from digesting itself. Cells are held together by tight junctions so that nothing leaks in between them, because stomach acid will eat the wall of the stomach. Anything that damages the mucosal barrier of the stomach will cause inflammation or gastritis. A gastric or a peptic ulcer is when stomach acid eats the wall of the stomach. Most of those are caused by a bacterial infection. Here we see this H. pylori damaging the mucosal layer of the stomach, and here we have a open bleeding ulceration in the wall of the stomach caused by that acid. So what's going on in the stomach? There's physical digestion. It's sloshing around, mixing with the acid. Proteins are getting denatured. And then we have chemical digestion from that pepsin, the protease. So some physical digestion, some chemical digestion. Regulation of the stomach, there's neural mechanisms, there's hormonal mechanisms based on the phase of eating, if you will. So here's our phases. You're thinking about eating, vagus nerve here, parasympathetic effects, that's acetylcholine incidentally from the vagus nerve, cause the stomach to start doing its job. We have this gastrin that's being released, another hormone that's stimulating the stomach. And then as the stomach starts pushing stuff into the small intestine, the small intestine sends a signal back that slows this down, so that only small amounts are going forward into the small intestine. In order to make stomach acid, there are three things that we need: acetylcholine, histamine, and gastrin. All three necessary for maximum hydrochloric acid production. Antihistamines will block the production of histamine and decrease that release of hydrochloric acid. We have hydrogen blockers now that will also help decrease that hydrochloric acid. Here's the mechanism for hydrochloric acid production. It's really not that important. You should know the stomach makes hydrochloric acid. And when the stomach fills up, it's going to stretch out to a degree, and then it's going to relax. We get a stress relaxation response, just like we do in the bladder. The stomach has pacemaker cells. It's constantly churning, and it's going to push stuff forward into the small intestine. Little 3 millimeter spurts, and then the rest of it sloshes back. Enters the small intestine, and then the rest of digestion is going to happen after that. Now, stomach acid is really strong. It's enough to kill bacteria, enough to denature proteins, enough to dissolve lots of minerals. Swallow something metal, and it will probably go all the way through you, but it will be worn a bit when it comes all the way through because of the action of stomach acid. Animals like the tigers here, and my cheetah, and my other tigers, even your dog, they can eat bones. Stomach acid will dissolve those minerals, and then the collagen's broken down. So what I'm saying is that, hypothetically speaking, you could feed someone to a tiger, and there would be nothing left. They would eat the bones and all, and there would be nothing left of your millionaire husband. No evidence at all. I'm just saying. Alright. So our next thing to talk about is the small intestine, and we're going to stop here. Like I promised, we're going to break this into smaller bits. So the next lecture will be small intestine, and we'll pick up there.